Hello, everybody. Thank you for joining today. This is again weekend and Saturday in the United States. A lot of things going on. Appreciate you
Hey,
all joining for this panel discussion. Today is December 12th, which is the day when the government of India had passed Citizenship Amendment Act. Actually, it was yesterday they passed. But today there were protests all over India against it, um, particularly in the view of National Register of Citizens (NRC). The CAA made all of a sudden a real constitutional problem for the fundamental rights of all Indian citizens, especially the poor and people internally who move around for various reasons, jobs and natural disasters and all that, who generally do not have their papers that prove the citizenship. It was a major problem for everybody, but particularly for Muslims because of the CAA, how it was written, that excluded Muslims particularly. So that caused a major concern actually that led to protests. And after that, hundreds and thousands of people have been arrested. Many of them are in jail. Many of them are going to courts in and out. So this discussion, the discussion will be focused on that today. And we have a STEAM panel to discuss this. We have with us Aakar Patel, Teesta Setalvad, Imran Ahmed, Ajit Sahi, and Dr. Ritumbra Manuvie. I will start with Aakar. Let me give a brief intro to Aakar. Aakar Patel is a well-known human rights defender who has earlier served as director of Amnesty International. He is a prolific writer, columnist, and has worked with many leading media organizations, including serving as deputy editor of the Deccan Chronicle and as editor-in-chief of Midday Multimedia Limited. He has also authored and co-authored several hard-hitting books, including Rights and Wrongs, a report on the 2002 Gujarat riots. Currently, Aakar is regularly commenting on farmers' protests like, will center be forced to give in to the farmers? Government has used all tricks on the farmers. Never apologize, never explain is the motto of Modi's government. Perhaps he will shed some light on these comments as well. So Aakar, please, you have 12 minutes. Please go ahead.
thanks very much. I won't take that long. I'd like to thank you and all of you who are present today. I'd like to congratulate all of us on the first anniversary of what, to my mind, has been the most significant movement on the ground in our country since 1947. I would say even preceding that. I don't think that Gandhi mobilize the sort of numbers that he did as and in as wide a geography as the no CA, no NRC protests did. It is true that for the most part, these protests were led, as they should have been, by a particular community, in this case, the Muslims of India, especially the women. But we cannot disregard the fact that there were many non-Muslims who also participated in it actively, particularly the youth and some of us who were slightly older, who felt that this was a response and a challenge to what was happening to our country in a fairly accelerated mode. The history of India as a secular nation shows that post the adoption of the constitution, several rights were taken away from us. First, by the governments that preceded the BJP, including under Nehru, when Article 19 especially was reduced and the rights of citizens to peacefully assemble, to free speech were encroached upon by the Congress. But I think after 2014 and Mr. Modi, what we've seen is a fairly aggressive reduction in our rights and a move away from the secular nature of our constitution. The only significant pushback to that has come from the no CAA, no NRC movement. It hasn't come from the opposition. It tells us two things. The first is that of the three instruments that are available to us as Indians, which is the vote, the courts, and litigation and protest, the most effective has been the last. That the courts have been not the friend of liberty that the Constitution expects the Supreme Court to be. It has only been the pressure from citizens that has blocked the National Register of Citizens from going nationwide. If we remember Mr. Shah's chronology, what was meant to happen was that first the CAA would get passed, which it was, and that is what started the protest. After that, they would bring the NRC nationally. What that would do is it would reverse the burden of proof. It would ask citizens or those suspected of not being citizens to prove that they were Indian in some form. The government of Assam hired contractors on 2-year contracts. This is from an affidavit that was submitted to Guwahati High Court, where the government said that those contractors who would not be able to maximize the number of people that they declared foreigner would not be given an extension. So there was a pressure on those individuals who did not actually look at the documents but declared people foreigners to get their jobs. And I think that this is something that the world noticed. The courage and the defiance of the women of India, particularly the Muslims, especially those of Shaheen Bagh, led to intervention in our domestic affairs of the sort that we've not seen in the past. The motion in the European Union Parliament, which was tabled but not subsequently taken upon because of COVID, was only one of them. I think that the amount of pressure that was brought to bear upon the government because of these protests is the only thing that stopped the NRC from going national. And in that sense, it was a victory. I would say it was a very clean victory. The fact that Mr. Modi said that the NRC had not been discussed within his government, I think it was a fairly cowardly way of backing out of something that his own home minister had promised would come to be. But to conclude, I would say that of these three things that we as Desis have, available to us, one is vote, the second is recourse to the justice system, and the third is protest. What has worked in terms of fundamental rights essentially is the last, where it is when we stand up and protest in large numbers that the government backs down. And I think that just as the Muslim women were successfully able to push back the nationwide NRC, similarly, the farmers of North India will be able to push back on these current farmers. Thank you.
You're muted, I think.
I can't hear you. Yeah.
You're on mute.
Thank you, Aakar, for that. After other panelists, we will come back to some of the remarks to elaborate on that. Next, our next panelist is Teesta Setalvad. She is an Indian civil rights activist and journalist. She is the secretary of Citizens for Justice and Peace, CJP, an organization formed to fight for justice for the victims of 2002 Gujarat riots. Her work in securing justice and speaking truth to the power and supporting human rights for all is well known. Most of us know her through her work. I want to pry briefly in her personal life. Teesta was born into a Gujarati Hindu family. Setalvad is the daughter of Atul Setalvad, a Mumbai-based lawyer, and his wife Sita Setalvad. Her parental grandfather was MC Setalvad, India's first Attorney General. Setalvad is married to Javed Anand, a journalist turned minority rights activist. They have two children, a daughter and a son. Teesta.
Thank you so much, Rasheed, for your kind remarks. Hello, Aakar. Hello, Ajit. And hello, Imran bhai and Ritumbra. Great to be on this panel. It was indeed a very, very historic struggle and a protest that was launched virtually from the first day that these the Citizenship Amendment Act 2019 were passed. I think what we need to stress is the manner in which the acts were passed in Parliament, completely undemocratic. Weak as the opposition is and disappointing as it always is for us, the fact is that they had proposed, they opposed, wanted amendments, wanted it referred to a joint select committee, did not happen. Very similar to the fashion in which the 3 farm bills have been passed in the midst of COVID and the 4 labor code bills have been passed, nullifying the gold standard of labor legislation, which is like 24 labor laws, which give the 8 working standards. So, I mean, you have a series of transgressions. In fact, I wrote a paper before the 2019 elections for the Kanambiran lectures where I said this government appears to have declared a war on its own people. And it's opened up so many fronts that you just don't know which front to fight on and which one front is the most important to fight on. However, having said that, I was in Malegaon addressing a mass meeting of about 10,000 people in a college ground on December 15th last year, when the dastardly violent attack by the Delhi police on Jamia Millia Islamia and Aligarh Muslim University took place. And, we had started that meeting by saying ki aaj ki sham Shaheen Bagh ke naam. And then we ended up by saying that aaj ki sham Shaheen Bagh or Jamia or Aligarh Muslim University ke Naujawano ke naam. And it's absolutely true that the singular clarity and courage, by the way, not just Muslim women, Dadi, we know Bilkis Dadi and all that, but young Muslim youth took to the leadership of that struggle was amazing, unprecedented. But also the non-Muslims who actually joined in. And my city is a very apolitical city, Mumbai. But the 19th December protest at Azad Maidan had over 50,000 people there, 50,000 people there. I mean, it was amazingly well organized, spontaneous, all the rest of it. So I think the government was really stuck, and Aakar is right that because of that, they actually had to declare that we won't have an NRC. However, I don't believe this government because they will still try to bring it in. There's still what I call the mindless hardliners within the government who, despite the failure of Assam, despite the contradictions within the NRC exclusions, despite the 1,600 crore rupees spent by the state alone, despite the World Bank figures which show a complete poverty graph in Assam post-2007, which can be linked directly to the citizenship conundrum, 300,000 public servants doing nothing else, not providing education, not providing health, but sitting in the Nagrik Seva Kendras. It's a ridiculously non-productive exercise, but it is meant to keep a population in perpetual trauma and turmoil. There have been 107 deaths in Assam, largely those of suicide. And if you want to understand why the rest of India, and particularly the Muslims in the rest of India, understood the motive behind the Home Minister's chronology, it is because of the experience of Assam. Because we've seen a triple assault in Assam. On the one hand, the D voters, 113,000 people declared D voters since 1997 by the Election Commission, 117,000 declared foreigners by a colonial law in the Foreigners Act 1946, where the adjudicating body that Aakar referred to is the Foreigners Tribunal, a creature that is not within the ambit of the Constitution, not within the ambit of evidentiary procedure of criminal law, where we've analyzed 1,200 Foreigner Tribunal orders, 75% of them are ex parte, where the person is not even asked to defend himself or herself. It's a non-transparent body. You have targets being set by the executive. Itne logon ko aapko foreigner declare karna hai, etc., etc. You have terms like projected father and projected mother evolving from these tribunals, which are a complete trauma for women. In the D-voters, as Ritumbra will tell you in her study, 69% of the D-voter process victims are women. In the NRC process too. However, we have to understand from the Assam experience that the whole question of a free, fair and just NRC, which for me as a civil rights activist is a misnomer, because nowhere in the world is a documentary test of citizenship, particularly in a country like ours, where you have 42% of Indians only having birth certificate. However, Assam went through a very difficult period, violent period, fractious period. And so for the minorities in Assam, including the religious minorities, when we started work there, Citizens for Justice and Peace, CJP started work in 2016, we had to accept the consensus. The consensus was we want a free, fair, just NRC. So however difficult the concept was for us, we had to work with it. And even today, a large section of Assamese society is wedded to this concept, despite the fact that the higher judiciary has failed us here. And I really want to say that post 2009, a lot of the anomalies, manipulations, changes in the SOPs and procedures as to which documents will be accepted or not have come under the Supreme Court and Guwahati High Court watch. So we have to ask ourselves the question today that when the rest of India faces this possibility of this huge social turmoil and political exclusion, can ever a judicial process of this kind be offered? If you look at the numbers today, 1.9, 19 lakh people, 1,900,000 people excluded from NRC, and total 2.2 million people and their families affected. If you look at how our courts function, it will take 234 years for the cases to get adjudicated. So the process is meant to be the punishment. It's not meant to be ever solved. So we need to gear ourselves to the possibility that once things settle down a little bit, they might try this bogey again. Because unfortunately, I'd like to say with all my, it's absolutely true what Aakar said, that even earlier governments had impinged on our rights. In fact, I'd like to particularly flag the UAPA, a 1967 law, which is now being used to criminalize those who were in the leadership of the protests after the CAA amendment, particularly in Delhi, where you have at least 21 people, including young women and men from the Muslim community incarcerated, including 2 young women who are not Muslims also incarcerated. This UAPA, the draconian amendments to UAPA, bringing in provisions from POTA into the UAPA, which is a standard criminal law, came after the repeal of POTA in 2003. And the first set of amendments was 2004, the second set of amendments was 2009, and then the worst of them was 2019. So, you know, I still remember the debate in Parliament when only the left parties opposed the 2008 amendments, when the police confession was allowed, long periods of incarceration without bail were allowed, and only the left parties argued with the ruling because Bombay had been, we had the Mumbai terror attack which justified those amendments, that if we allow these kind of draconian laws to creep in with relatively easier governments, then they are going to become a tool in the hands of the obviously vicious majoritarian fascist ones. We need to say this upfront. And the UAPA is one such example. There are other examples at the National Security Act, Uttar Pradesh, Dr. Kafil Ahmad. Again, they've gone to Supreme Court today asking for his bail to be cancelled, asking him to be back in jail. NSA is being continually misused by the Uttar Pradesh government. You have PESA and other such quote-unquote national security state laws, which are also problematic. So I think a challenge for all of us on this first anniversary and also a few days away from International Human Rights Day is to see that how do we make these subjects of campaigns, repealment of such black draconian laws, repealment of such national security. And you know, I also want to say something which is very inconvenient, but I want to say that in the 10 years of a relatively better government under UAPA 1 and 2, you had large numbers of young Muslim men incarcerated under UAPA. Ajit knows it, we know it. We worked on it together. My close friend Ashish Khaitan worked on it as well in Gulel.com. But you know, at that point, we did not have the same vociferous response from the human rights community. So these are also questions we need to ask ourselves, that can we afford to be silent when they are relatively easier governments? Now, coming back to this particular government that seems to have put aside all norms of democracy. I mean, the passage of the laws, the way the laws are notified in parliament, the way they are passed, the way there are no discussions on these laws, all of these point to the fact that this is a government that believes only in majoritarianism and the vote. And once it's in power, it believes it can crush institutions. But then what are our institutions doing? Apart from what is the judiciary doing, what is the election commission doing during elections? These are serious questions that I think Indian democracy will have to be grappled with, because many of us have long since said that a democracy is not only about winning or losing an election. It's also because how deep your institutions of democracy are, how democratic your institutions are, how responsive they are to acts of transgression by the party in power. I think these are very, very serious questions. So, I mean, I would just like to say that I'm very glad that this discussion has been organized on this first anniversary. While we should be reassured that the NPR may not be implemented, I'm not confident that it will not be raised on the eve of the Bengal or Assam election, which are a few months from now. The only thing that will stop this government is rumblings within its own ranks, because in Assam, my colleagues Zamsher Ali and Nandu Ghosh have shown, when they dissected the 1,900,000 people who are excluded, that it's not the politically convenient target alone who has faced exclusion, which is the Muslim. You have large numbers of Bengali Hindus also excluded. You have Santalis, you have Gorkhas, and you have 500,000 Hindi Bhashia, meaning Hindi-speaking people who never even bothered to apply to the NRC because they didn't want to get into the headache of having to produce all these documents. So stories of these huge exclusions, including refusal of the refugee certificate of Bengali Hindus, are creeping into Bengal. And your Matua and your Namoshodra community, which is a huge vote bank for the upcoming right-wing party, is today shaky on the CAA and PA. It's not completely reassured that CAA is going to work for it. So I think these are some of the issues that we need to recall and flag for ourselves. As a human rights practitioner and a human rights defender, I ask myself how Citizens for Justice and Peace started work in Assam so late. We should have started it much earlier. I ask myself why we ignored these rules, the 2003 citizenship rules, which were brought in from the back door by the NDA-1 government, which allows a taluk level officer, if an NPR is taluk level officer can look at my documents or Aakar's documents and decide whether he or I should be declared a foreigner. So these are certain challenges for us. We need to challenge these rules that have been brought in. I also want to draw attention to the fact that in the state of Assam, the population lives in a perpetual state of trauma, and the land policy being brought in by the ruling party there in 2019, which was attempted to be pushed through in the assembly session of the last winter session. Fortunately, the opposition created a huge hue and cry, meant that the land use in the char areas and the riverine areas would be changed. And what does this mean? You have 3,500,000 people living in these char areas in Assam, 95% of whom are Muslims. And this land policy is likely to affect 113 million Muslims and 7 million Bengali Hindus. So, you know, a lot of policy measures are being brought in by the regime at the state level and the center level, which is to disempower already marginalized communities. Their political, quote unquote, enemy is the religious minority, the dissenter, the political dissenter, the communists. But in one state of hand, I'm coming increasingly to believe, if you look at the 3 Farmers Bill and the amazing opposition that is has come up to it in this country, and we have to salute the farmers' agitation. I believe that there are corporate entities who are also driving certain the policy changes of this government. And I think these are huge challenges for the human rights movement, which we'll need to look at, because what the farmer of India is saying today is that we don't want our autonomy taken away, our land rights taken away, the right to cultivate what we want to be taken away. You cannot decide what is good for us and whether contract farming, which will go to farmers, is good for us. So these are some of the huge, huge challenges that are facing us. I want to also urge group like the IAMC, which is looking at the human rights issue, look at the issue of business, economy, and human rights. I keep saying this because that is something we don't do often enough in the human rights movement. I certainly don't do it enough. It's not my métier. It's not my this thing. I think we need to look at the poverty graph within Assam. I think we need to look at the state has admitted it spent 1,600 crores within Assam already. What does this kind of unproductive use of resources, human resources and material resources mean? According to us, the victimized population has also spent something like 1,100 crores. Small land holdings, jewelry, so much stuff has been sold apart from the trauma and 107 deaths there. So there's a lot of challenge and a lot of work that needs to be done. And I thank IAMC for organizing this meeting on the anniversary of the passage of a legislation, which I'd like to end by saying the Citizenship Amendment Act, for the first time in the history of this country, brought in the marker of religion into our law. And it was not just anti-constitutional in the sense that it violated Article 14, 15, 19, and 25, but the fact is that you brought in a negative marker of discrimination for the first time in our law, where for the first time you're excluding one section of the population from 3 neighboring countries. Our question to the government was that by all means make it easier for those from these countries to come in, but also include the dissenters from Pakistan, Afghanistan, and Bangladesh, the Ahmadiyas, the non-believers, and also include people from Myanmar, from Sri Lanka, and from Nepal, from other neighboring countries. So you can also allow people like the Rohingyas to get. I mean, there has to be a rationale, a reasonable, reasonable discrimination justification. It does not meet that test. The question is whether we are talking about citizenship amendment laws, or whether we are talking about abrogation of Article 370, or we are talking about the farmers' laws or the labor law. Is the court going to hold the government responsible? That's the question for us. Thank you very, very much for this opportunity.
Thank you, Teesta, for that very concrete and specific situation and instances you have reminded us. But one particularly stands out is the 2003 law that within the in India government that you referred. But what also means that the 10 years after NDA government, also that remained in the Congress government or UPA government. I also want to here recognize at this time that this panel is co-organized by the London Story and Independent Human Rights Defense
I'm so sorry. I'm really sorry.
No, that's okay. That's okay. Our next panelist is Mr. Imran Wali Ahmed. Is a globally known advocate for transparent and accountable governance system. A true communicator, strategic advisor, and innovative thinker, he has lectured at several universities, including Klingendale Institute for Foreign Relations in The Hague, Paramadina University in Jakarta, Central Europe University in Budapest, Tsinghua University, and Yao Cheng University in Beijing, amongst others, on various issues ranging from leadership to India in the 21st century to Islam, the West, and the rest. Imran is a trustee of the London Story, an independent human rights defense organization registered in the Netherlands. Imran.
Thank you, Rasheed bhai. And it's a great pleasure to be on this panel with such distinguished people as Teesta, Aakar, Ajit, and all of you. Thank you for including me in this. I'm going, it's very difficult to follow after people like Aakar and Teesta because they cover almost everything that you want to say. But I'm going to just go a little bit towards the topic of dissent and why and crushing of dissent, which again, as has been mentioned by them earlier, has been happening over decades in India. But since 2014, this seems to be a serious problem where we have many people now locked up, political prisoners in India. We have some very dynamic human rights activists, different activists that are all lying in jail today. Father Stan, who I've worked with in Bihar, Gautam Naulakha, a good friend of mine. I mean, they're sitting in jail today and there is nothing we can do. Now, governments have tried to do this in the past. It isn't the first time that people locked up dissenters. It was lovely decades ago when you had very clear-cut ideas. Democracy, dissent allowed. No democracy, dissent not allowed. Clear-cut. But that's not the case anymore. All of a sudden, there's been this paradigm shift. There is not left and right anymore. It's open and closed now. And open and closed societies can be democratic or non-democratic. Democratic societies are closed societies now, where you're locking borders, building walls, NRC, CAA, all kinds of things coming up. These are all within a democratic process. So one has to understand, why is this happening and why is there so much support from people to governments doing this? Not only support, but they become violently supportive. And the only thing after, for a long time trying to understand what the issue is, the only thing that I can think of is that these are not political parties anymore. The Republican Party in the US, the BJP, these are not political parties anymore. These are now, the BJP is a socio-religious movement with 120 million members. We're still trying to deal with them like a political outfit. So we're talking about the economy, we're talking about farmers' rights, we're talking about handling of COVID, we're talking about prices. They're not interested in that. The people who support that are looking at one thing. Garv se kaho hum Hindu hain. That's it. I come from Bihar. If you go to Bihar and you see what is happening with the migrant workers that came there, they died in droves, died. And yet they have voted for the BJP. And you ask them, why? Why? What has happened? And they say, the only thing is, Garv se kaho hum Hindu hain. That I'm getting my identity back. Exactly what happened in the US. Exactly what's happening there. So dealing with them as political outfits is where we have to now understand they are not political outfits. They are completely different kind of outfits, and we have to change the strategy we use. Now, we've had a Bihar election just now. Who tackled this issue was a political outfit that did exactly the same thing, but the other end of the spectrum, which is Owaisi. Owaisi said, Garv se kaho hum Musalman hai, and he picked up 6 seats, 5-6 seats. A guy who is a nobody in Bihar, because he tackled these people in exactly the same way. And we don't want that, because instead of one enemy, we're going to have 2. We're going to have to fight them both. So that's not the answer. But we have to understand how we're going to tackle these issues, because these are serious. These are very, very serious issues. And the other problem, of course, that we're facing in India today is that because the government is placed in the kind of position it's placed. I mean, I'll just go back to, the EU yesterday passed the global Magnitsky Act. So they're going to now, it's got a global jurisdiction. It can sanction all kinds of political people the way the Americans have been doing. And we're all very happy and hoping that something positive happens there as well. I'm less optimistic, because I think when you have laws like this, you use them to your advantage. And I think this is more geared towards China and Russia than towards India. And that's where one of the problems lies, is that India is in a position where, because of China and Russia, we're being given a free hand to do what we feel like. You've got Kashmir and Hong Kong, very similar. Everybody is covering Hong Kong and nobody's talking about Kashmir. And any dissenter today is locked up. Anybody who says anything is put away. You're either a Pakistani or a Khalistani. CAA was Pakistan, farmers is Khalistan. And you've got people that are actually going out and beating people to death. How? Why? Again, we go back to what I said earlier. These are not political outfits anymore. These are socio-religious outfits, which means when we talk about dissent, it's not political dissent anymore. It is a religious nationalism, and therefore it becomes almost blasphemy, giving people the right to go out and defend their religion. The way it's happening in Pakistan, where they'll go out and kill somebody because he's blaspheming, that's what they're doing in India, because it's blasphemous to be against this government today. That is what we're fighting. We're fighting a kind of a religious nationalism. So when we talk about the freedom movement, I mean, I'm looking over here, we've got Article 124A, 1833. Gandhiji's been locked up in that. My father, 1945, locked up in that. So many people locked in that, using the same laws today. No problem, because this government and the people that we're talking about were not involved in the freedom struggle at that time. It's a completely different struggle. Just before 15th of August, We had the Janmabhoomi, whatever it was, and that was dubbed as this huge event that is one of the greatest events of India, because for them, 15th of August means nothing. It's not an important event, a religious event, religious nationalism. That's what we're trying to fight. We are, I know it sounds cliche, but we are becoming a Taliban-run state. And as my dear friend Hari Menon said, the only difference between present-day BJP and the Taliban is that one has more gods and one has better food. And that's where we stand today. And we've got to find a solution to be able to tackle religion, because it's the religious nationalism that we're fighting. And we can keep on talking about the economy, and we can keep on the price of onions and everything else. They'll give it, as Teesta said just now, she does not believe that that they will forget NRC and CAA. Even if they give in to the farmers, that's not something they're going to give up that easily. Their whole policy is to mobilize their support group, which is large enough to be able to change the scenario. We may not be constitutionally a Hindu state today, but since 2014, we are one. And I pray to God that that reverses, because the people that died, my father's an INA officer. He was Netaji's military secretary. These people died fighting for India. They died fighting for an India, not this India, not this India. They died fighting for the India that Aakar talked about, that Teesta talked, that all of us talk about. When you have a problem, you don't come out because you're a Muslim and you've got to fight for Muslim rights. In fact, the Muslim was the last person to come out. He didn't have to come out and fight because a secular Indian was out there fighting for him. And that's what we're losing today. We still have great people, many of them locked up. And that's what we're talking about, dissent and how it's being crushed. And it's being crushed because they get the support of people that are still looking at this as religious nationalism, as blasphemous. And that's what we have to tackle. Thank you.
Thank you, Imran, for that. I think that the profound point you made is that this is not a political entities anymore, BJP and other names you mentioned here, Republicans and all that. Perhaps after Ajit's remarks, we can get into a little deeper on that. Next, our next panelist is Ajit Sahi. He is Advocacy Director with the Indian American Muslim Council and a Washington, D.C. based advocacy organization, and he leads its advocacy work, D.C. and rest of the country. He's when it comes to human rights and religious freedoms, he has been very persuasive with whether it is U.S. Congress or U.S. government in other institutions, including State Department and other such entities. He is a former journalist from India, where he worked for 33 years. He worked with the Indian Express, Tehelka, Star News, IANS, a news agency. He has spoken around the world on issues of religious persecution and human rights violations in India. He also speaks regularly across the US. He has testified before the Tom Lantos Human Rights Commission of the US House of Representatives. He was a panelist at a discussion called by the US Department of State at the National Prayer Breakfast in Washington, D.C. Also this year, he was a panelist at the Harvard India Conference in a discussion on the NRC-CAA. With that, Ajit, you have your remarks, please.
Unmute karo.
You're on mute.
That's what I was trying to find, where the button was. I knew I was on mute. Thank you, Rasheed Saab. Thank you, everybody. It's wonderful to be in this great company and to speak with all of you. We are also broadcasting live on Facebook. I just want to start by giving a shout out to both Aakar Patel and Teesta Setalvad. They have talked at length about how dissent is being crushed and how India is now witnessing one of the worst phases it has seen in 75 years since independence. What they have not mentioned, and this is the greatness of these two people, is that they themselves are victims of this, this campaign by the government of India. Both Teesta and Aakar Patel. Teesta has been suffering from this, or I should not use the word suffering, because she has been amazing. She has fought this whole campaign against her with fortitude, with great bravery and courage. And so I salute her for more than a decade, especially I think since 2002, when she jumped into this, headlong, she jumped into this, this effort to bring justice to people, to the victims of the violence in Gujarat in 2002. And Aakar Patel, especially, he's been a campaigner against the Hindutva right wing, against the fascism. He's written extensively about it. He was the head of Amnesty International in India. Most recently, just a few weeks ago, they have filed another case against him. So with us, we have two people who, who are absolutely as courageous as Gautam Navlakha and G.N. Sai Baba and Umar Khalid, and it's a great honor to be in their company. I think because I'm in the US, because already Teesta, Aakar and Imran have spoken at length, and because I'm in the US, I would like to take this opportunity to talk about what's happening in the world. I completely share the assessment, the dark assessment of what's going down in India. But I would also like to share with you that I'm seeing a tremendous silver lining across the globe, especially in the West, on what is happening in India. I mean, 2 years ago, it would have been impossible to have a New York Times or a Washington Post or a Guardian or The Economist notice what's going down in India and call it out for what it is, which is the crushing of dissent. Let me just remind you, just 2 weeks ago, The Economist has done a cover story, and it's called How Resilient is Democracy. I'm going to read just a couple of paras if you give me a moment from this. This was the edition of November 28th. We are on 12th of December, just barely 14 days ago. And this is a briefing. It is headlined, India's Diminishing Democracy. India's Diminishing Democracy. And that's the shoulder line, the strap line. And the headline is, Narendra Modi threatens to turn India into a one-party state. And below that is a blurb which says, an increasingly dominant prime minister and the ongoing erosion of checks and balances. So in just the headline, what do we see? The Economist, which is 180 years old, arguably the world's most respected news journal. And by no means is it a leftist journal, It's pretty much right of center. And it is using, in just 3 parts of the headline, it says, India's diminishing democracy, Narendra Modi threatens to turn India into a one-party state, and the ongoing erosion of checks and balances. Just give me a couple of minutes. I would like to read from the story, from what they have written, just to let you know how much the spread now is, how the world is waking up, is looking at what Modi is doing, what the RSS project is doing to India, and this is something increasingly being exposed. So it starts by talking about Arnab Goswami's case and how quickly he got bail from the Supreme Court. And this is what the magazine says, and I start reading now. So the court's ruling was not surprising. What shocked was the speed of its intervention. Mr. Goswami spent just a week in detention, and his case had hardly reached the lowest rung of courts, yet the country's topmost judges ignored the court's backlog of some 60,000 cases to schedule a bail hearing within a day of the anchor's appeal. This is in a country where prisons hold twice as many inmates awaiting trial, twice as many inmates, which is more than 60,000, twice of 60,000, some 330,000 people as they do convicts. A majority of these under trials come from minority groups, and a quarter have spent more than a year behind bars. When Mr. Modi clamped direct rule on the erstwhile state of Jammu and Kashmir, thousands of its residents were detained. Out of more than 550 writs of habeas corpus, such as Mr. Goswami's, that Kashmiris filed, courts have disdained to look at all but a handful. In the same week that Mr. Goswami won his swift reprieve, Father Stan Swami, an 83-year-old Jesuit priest who has championed rights for tribal peoples and is being held as an alleged Maoist terrorist, made a plea before a lower court. As he suffers from Parkinson's disease and cannot hold a cup steady, lawyers requested that he be allowed to have a straw in his prison cell. The court postponed that hearing for 20 days. Even more striking is the court's foot dragging over constitutional questions. In 2017, Mr. Modi slipped through parliament a controversial law. Notice the use of the phrase slipped through parliament, a controversial law that created quote unquote electoral bonds, asserting that as a budgetary matter, it need not be scrutinized by the upper house, which was not then BJP controlled. The Supreme Court still has not examined the constitutionality of this innovation, which allows unlimited anonymous donations to political parties. Other big questions its judges have yet to take up include the imposition last year of direct rule in Kashmir and some 140 legal petitions against the Citizenship Amendment Act of 2019, which, by inserting religion as a criterion for citizenship, undermines the secular nature of the Indian state. And then it goes down to say it is not only the courts, alas, that seem eager to stay in step with the government. Many cogs in India's institutional machinery are not merely complicit, but have grown complicit in a project that threatens to turn the country into a one-party state. At least during the emergency, the threat was clear, says Tarunab Khaitan, Vice Dean of Law at Oxford University and author of a paper, quote, Killing a Constitution with 1,000 Cuts, that details India's institutional decay. Quote, what we have now is a wolf in sheep's clothing, he says. Quote, there is no full frontal big ticket attack on democracy, but there are multiple simultaneous attacks on all fronts. We are sleepwalking into authoritarianism, quotes closed. So I deliberately read a bit from this because, you know, we need, this is something tremendous. This story goes on to further say that democracy is threatened. It names 4 countries in the world where democracy is severely threatened. India is one of them. India is the worst case, the story says. The other 3 are Turkey, Poland, and Hungary.
Hungary.
Yeah, so it is remarkable how this is being noticed by governments all over. I remember in December last year, after the CAA, the New York Times editorial board wrote an editorial. And the headline of that editorial was, Modi makes his bigotry even clearer. Last year, on 22nd of October, there was a hearing, a congressional subcommittee. The subcommittee's name is the Subcommittee on Asia, Pacific, and Non-Proliferation. This is a subcommittee of the US House of Representatives. They called a hearing on human rights in South Asia, but practically it was a hearing on Kashmir that came on 22nd of October. Both Rasheed Ahmed, Mr. Rasheed Ahmed, who is here moderating our program, and we were there in the audience. There were about, I would say, about 50, 60 people in the audience. And that was a day-long affair. And it was unbelievable how so many members of Congress who were not even part of that committee, they are not even members of the House Foreign Affairs Committee, which is the parent committee of that subcommittee. They made time to come to that committee's hearing, and they they asked questions. They were prepared, they were ready. There are people who are not even part of the Pakistan caucus or the India caucus, who do not have human rights and religious freedom as their agenda. You know, these are members of Congress who work on different committees such as transportation or energy and stuff like that. And yet they were so incensed. One of the members of Congress, he's in his 40s. He's a Democrat from the state of Arizona, Congressman Gallego, if I'm not mistaken. And he was the last to speak up. And he's not even a member of the either committees. And he said, I was a US Marine. I served in Iraq. I served in other theaters. And even in those places with such kind of conflict, the internet was never shut off, neither by the local government nor by the US government. So it is unbelievable that the internet has been shut off in the state of Jammu and Kashmir. At the end of that hearing, I want to share with all of you, the Hindu American Foundation, which is the US-based front of the RSS, the current head of Hindu American Foundation, a lady by the name of Suhag Shukla, she was crying. There were literally tears streaming down her cheeks, you know. And the Hindu and several Hindu right-wing Twitter handles from DC, they were tweeting afterwards. One of them said, today has been a disaster for us. Just 2 days ago, the Alameda County in San Francisco, in California, in Silicon Valley, has passed a resolution against CAA, NRC, NPR, and it has actually called out the state persecution of Muslims. And this is, I think, the 7th or the 8th city in the United States. And this is remarkable because Silicon Valley is full of the RSS kind of people. It's full of the RSS Sanghi Hindus there. And yet this Alameda County, I think in July, San Francisco Board of Supervisors, which is the name of the San Francisco County, they passed a similar resolution. This spate began in January with Seattle passing that resolution. The RSS people in Seattle, they lined up at the Board of Supervisors. This was before the pandemic, so all of that was not virtual, it was physical. And yet they were there, they tried to speak, they spoke, and yet unanimously the resolution was passed. We have seen St. Paul in Minnesota. We have seen Cambridge in Massachusetts. These are all places where the Sanghis are in full throttle, and yet they have been defeated. Most recently, we had this another webinar where the Green Party in Australia, this was a London story, and IAMC had jointly organized this. Ritu and Rasheed Saab, they have been working day and night to make this happen. We had, I think, Australian senators who are speaking up on this. What I'm trying to say that these are early days, certainly these are early days. And of course, the ability of foreigners, foreign governments, foreign journals to impact the actual decision-making in India is severely limited. I mean, of course, India is a large country. It's a big country. The US government is still to speak on many of these issues. It has hardly said a word. Even if we keep aside the outgoing President Trump's words, which were completely inappropriate when he visited India during February, as the violence was going on just a few miles east of the US Embassy, where he held a joint press conference with Mr. Modi in New Delhi. But even otherwise, it's taking a lot of time for the US government to speak up. But the fact is that we are getting a lot more support in the US, in the UK, in other places in Europe than, say, even 2 or 3 years previously. This is something, this is not just a heartening development, it is also something to leverage. It is also something for us to actively leverage. You know, I was living in India until last year. And of course, all of us have felt, I felt the same way, that this is our internal fight. We should not bring outsiders into this fight. But I think it's important, now we live in the 21st century, I think it is important to understand and to realize that no country can now claim that this is an internal matter. This is our internal matter. It just doesn't work anymore in a globalized environment. That is why Justin Trudeau has spoken up, on the farmers' agitation. He's a Canadian Prime Minister. And the fact is that Mr. Modi, all the apologists for Mr. Modi who are saying that he should, that Justin Trudeau should not interfere in India's internal matter. The fact is Mr. Modi went to Houston, Texas last year in September and stood there with Donald Trump and said, "Ab ki baar Trump sarkar." If that is not interference in another country's internal matter, then I don't know what is interference. So despite all the grandiosity, whether it is the foundation stone laying ceremony of the new parliament, or the watching Diwali celebrations, whatever this prime minister does, he is looking more and more like Nero, the Roman emperor, to the Western audiences. You will not find a single liberal space across the West. You will not find it in Western Europe. You will not find a liberal space in North America that is willing to speak out in support of Hindutva, or even in support of the Citizenship Amendment Act or the NRC. I remember at that briefing of the subcommittee on 22nd October last year, 2019, the then chair of that committee, a gentleman by the name of Brad Sherman, he's a member of Congress from California. While the committee was talking about Kashmir, he actually asked the official that was there from Department of State, he said, I have also heard that there is this National Register for Citizens and they are trying to implement it across India. Is it serious, or is this a crackpot idea? He used the term crackpot idea. So going forward, I think it is very important for us who are outside of India, such as Imran, such as London Story, Ritumbra, Manuvie, people in Canada, people in Germany. There are people who are very active in Germany, in England. Of course, the RSS and its affiliates have far greater resources, both human and financial. They have, in fact, they should have greater access than us because they have the huge industry, corporate sector lining up behind them and stuff like that. At the same time, they are not able to gain any traction with NRC, CAA, NPR, any of this stuff in politics, in politics and government. The politicians and governments have not been speaking up as much as we would like them to, but I think we are headed in the direction in the West where they will eventually start speaking up, because the pressure from American civil society or European civil society is only increasing. We have partnerships, Indian American Muslim Council. We have strong partnerships here in the United States. We have partnerships with Amnesty International, with Human Rights Watch, with Community to Protect Journalists, with Reporters Without Borders, with Jewish Voice for Peace. We have a very strong outreach to the United States Commission on International Religious Freedom, USCIRF, which is a independent federal commission that advises US government, US president, and US Congress. And as you know, the USCIRF recommended that India be designated, that the US Department of State should designate India as a country of particular concern, CPC, which is the list of the US government, the formal official list of the US government that designates India, that designates a country as the worst offender of religious freedom. And already there are countries like China, North Korea, Saudi Arabia.
Ajit, let's move to the discussion part.
Yes, all right. So I'll just conclude. So, and I'm seeing now that just last week, the US government has not included India in that category. And the sense of anger in the civil society in the US, outside of the Indian American groups, even in the regular American civil society groups, is palpable. So I think we have a tremendous opportunity internationally, and that's where we need to leverage. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Ajit, for that. Now we will have Dr. Ritumbra Manuvie, an assistant professor at the University of Groningen. She will probe into some of the remarks our panelists today made. She is also a trustee of the London Story, an independent human rights defense organization registered in Netherlands. So Dr. Manuvie, please probe into some of the comments. I'm really interested to know some more elaboration on
Thank you, Rasheed Saab. I am very delighted to have this very beautiful panel here today with us, speaking with us, especially Teesta, Aakar, Imran ji, and Ajit. And there is a lot that we as a younger generation of defenders have to learn from all of you who have spent almost over 3 to 4 decades in this fight against the establishment, protecting the human rights of the people. So I have some of my own questions as well for all of you, and I will like the panel to have discussions on that. But first, let me take this one question that we have got on question and answer session. The participant would like to know that, do you think that while the world is busy with pandemic, the government is already taking the CAA NRC process and implementing the NPR in a snide manner in the background? Perhaps Aakar or Teesta, because you're in India.
I can say that the problem with implementing the NRC is twofold. One is that on the side of civic protest, which is, the geography of the subcontinent is ghettoization. In some instances, in some states, as in Gujarat, it is forced ghettoization, and even the middle class Muslim Gujarati cannot move out of her neighborhood because she is, by law, meant to buy property only in certain neighborhoods. But I think the other problem is also the states, that there's a challenge in the Supreme Court from Kerala on the constitutionality of the law under Articles 14 and 15. And I think it's difficult, given the circumstances and the pushback, for the government to push through with the NRC. So far as I understand it, the NRC is dead nationwide. In Assam, given the data that the BJP has itself pulled out of the numbers by a district, it seems to be dead in Assam as well.
I would just like to calibrate that a little bit, because I think, without us knowing it, without citizens knowing it, an enumeration of the NPR had taken place in 2010, and another one took place in 2017. So I think in the form that we fear, where documents will be asked and certain community will be targeted, obviously people are very alert about it today. And many states, including Maharashtra, where you have a government which of which one of the three partners was previously in alliance with the BJP, have said that they will not allow it to happen. However, I still feel that we need to be extremely cautious and alert about this, because it will not be possible. I would not confidently say it's dead in Assam, for instance. It's not dead in Assam. There is a huge section of Assamese society, as I was saying in the previous panel we had this evening, which has a support for the NRC, which are progressives, etc. So I think in Assam, it's certainly not dead. It's a hanging sword over 1.9 million people, plus another 1.6 and 1.3 million, so 2.2 million people and their families. So I think Assam, it's certainly not dead, because it's a live thing. Any day you can get those rejection slips and rejection reasons coming in. The only reason why it's being kept in limbo is because not enough Muslims are there in that 1,900,000 people. But that doesn't mean they won't say that we want to start it all over again, because Assam's context is different. All over India, it's difficult, but I would still say we need to be cautious.
Thanks a lot, Teesta and Aakar. I have a question for Aakar next, and also because you have served as the operational director for the Amnesty in India. And my question to you is that we all know that Amnesty shut down this year, and this was also perhaps a larger part of the plan of the BJP government to crush the dissent. And a lot of parliaments, including the Dutch parliament, has taken notice of it and raised questions about Amnesty shutting down in India. This is certainly very unprecedented for a democracy like India's democracy, the largest democracy in the world. How do you see the space of the civil society body going forward from this point onward, when we do not have major players like Amnesty or even Greenpeace earlier had a problem in operating in India? What is the nature of the civil society body going to be like in future?
So I'd say two things. The first is that Amnesty hasn't shut. It has suspended operations because it can't pay any salaries. That's a separate point. And I hope that the justice system gives them the relief that they seek. But having been a part of Amnesty, I should accept the fact that civil society in India is fundamentally grassroots driven. It's not based on entities that are global. I think Amnesty is important because it is evidence-based. It does work on things like Kashmir and the NRC that not too many groups work on. But the most successful civil society actions in this country in the recent past have come outside of the organized groups. They've come out of, places like Shaheen Bagh. They've come out of places like the farmers' movement that we are seeing now. And I think so long as there is injustice in our part of the world, and I don't see that going away anytime soon, there will be organized groups, because we are a society that is ancient, that has very strong formative links within society that are able to mobilize at the points in time when they're needed, whether it is Muslim neighborhoods, whether it is the Jat in North India. So I don't foresee a time when there will be a lack of groups that will stand up to injustice when it directly affects them. Having said that, I think it's important that groups like Amnesty and Greenpeace be allowed to function in India, because it gives India the opportunity to link up with the rest of the world, especially the European and the North American world, which is advanced in the sense of how it views things like climate change, human rights. And we need to be able to establish our country, not just with people who we see as being our allies. Our problem in India today is that we don't have any kind of traditional allies anymore. We used to have Russia, which we don't anymore. It's hard to look at the map and see who India's friends are. To some extent, that's a good thing. I think it's very good that you have people in the US Congress who are interested in Kashmir, who are interested in CAA. To some extent, it's negative that we don't have the kind of stature that we did in the world anymore. But it's important that whatever linkages we have with the rest of the world on very large issues like human rights, like climate change, we ought to retain those links. And the loss of organizations like Greenpeace and like Amnesty redounds to the discredit of our country, and we ought to know that.
Thanks a lot, Aakar, for that. We have a question for the panelist, and the participant want to know if there is a nexus between corporates and Hindutva policy of current Indian government, even the CAA bill, including Hindutva re-engineering of the citizenship. Anyone from the panel?
I don't. Well, the thing is that the head of the Niti Aayog has said 3 days ago that he wants the BJP government to, not that he wants, that the BJP government is actually promoting 5 specific groups that will become global champions and then lift the economy of the country. The fact is that the data from the government shows that we've been declining in terms of GDP growth for the last 36 months. And the RBI says that we will actually decline for the next quarter as well. So what we are doing to ourselves internally in terms of our economy doesn't seem to be working to the plan that has been laid out for us. There was a government sample survey in 2018 which showed that Indians were spending less money on food in 2018 than they were in 2012. This is the government data, which was suppressed and now is being asked to be released. So we seem to be going through a phase where we are failing as an economy, and all the things that were supposed to be meant to be delivered to us in terms of growth and development don't seem to be coming to us. What we are getting for sure is all the rest of it, which is the majoritarianism and the sidelining and the brutalizing of specific communities.
No, I personally feel that this is an area which the human rights movement has ignored. And this is one of the reasons for our limited successes. That I do believe that if you look at states like Orissa and Gujarat, for instance, you can see a clear-cut connection between the corporatization and the corporate support of Hindutva and the absence of any resistance. You can look at Kalina Nagar, you look at the districts where there was an active resistance to land grab, transfer of public resources to private capital. And it is those areas where you have right-wing organizations like the RSS not having roots. You look at a state like Gujarat, for instance, where long before someone like the Prime Minister laid foot back in his home state in 2001, you see the simultaneous routing of the Ambani into the huge concessions that the Ambanis got in sales tax and all sorts of tax by the government and the growth of the BJP. So I think between certain kind of crony capitalist organizations, certain crony capitalist groups and Hindutva, you've seen a clear connection. And I don't think we can ignore the fact that this Prime Minister saw the whitewashing of his image post-2002 in the vibrant Gujarat summits that took place, which were a master stroke in terms of PR and propaganda. I'm not even talking about the kind of groups that he hired for the whitewashing of the image and the controversy behind those lobbyist groups that are based in the United States. I'm talking about very respectable corporate heads actually gathering at those vibrant Gujarat summits. And it's never been in the history of our country that we've seen they stand up and say that this man is prime ministerial material. So there is a shift. There's a big shift, and there's a big shift which said that this section of India, of money India, crony capitalist India, wanted a person who at that point glamorized the Gujarat model. And I'd also like to point out to the person who asked this question that please look at the so-called liberal television anchors of that time. Okay, I don't want to name them. Some of them are our good friends, so I don't want to name them. The guys who would actually on our television channels right up to 2007-8 actually carry exposures about 2002 violence. But if you ask them to have a discussion on Professor Atul Sood's book, which came out in 2011, which said poverty amidst plenty, and expose the Gujarat model for being jobless growth, the same television anchors who also happen to be close friends of all of us, many of us on this panel, would say that if you want to talk about 2002, fine, but let's not talk about the Gujarat model. And it took a Hardik Patel in 2015 August from the Patel community, which is not a backward marginalized community, it's the forward backwards of Gujarat, which benefited 88% in land reform. Land did not go to Dalits, but it went to the Patels. For Hardik Patel to say that the Gujarat model is meant jobless growth, even Patel youth don't have jobs. So there is a connection. We have not explored it enough.
Thanks a lot, Teesta. Yes, Ajit, please go ahead.
Ritumbra, I just wanted to add to what Teesta said. Just a small point. 2 days ago, there was a news story in the Indian Express based on a survey by Hunger Watch. And the headline says, in Gujarat,
21%,
had to sleep without single meal amid pandemic. Nearly 38% of respondents shared that their consumption of rice and wheat had decreased, while 40% said their consumption of pulses had come down, and 57% said their consumption of vegetables had reduced.
Yeah.
That's the Gujarat model. And now it's the India model.
Now it's the India model.
Yeah, I know that Aakar perhaps need to have another meeting soon. So I'm just going to put one more question before I go further. And Aakar, feel free to drop in between if you need to. That's okay. So the next question I have is, let me take this one first. What is the next agenda of BJP? Uniform Civil Code or Hindu Rashtra? And what does this mean for the future of India? What do you foresee in terms of uniform civil code?
I don't see a Hindu Rashtra as being anything different from what we have now. The problem with Hindu Rashtra ideologically is that it excludes most people from within itself, that you can't have the kind of... Nepal was a Hindu Rashtra till 2008, and what that meant was that it had a Kshatriya king with a Mool Purohit who was in the court who would give, advice. And to that extent, it was a Hindu Rashtra. It didn't have any of the other parts of the doctrine and the dogma, which would suggest that you would have a caste-based society. You can't have that in 2020 because it's not possible. We are a signatory to the Declaration of Human Rights. I don't think it's possible even within the country for a set of people to suppress a majority and say that we will only have education and trade and soldiery based on caste. So I think Hindu Rashtra as an idea is quite dead. What will happen, I think, is the continuing of what is happening now, which is there will be a pressure and a brutalization of the minority, especially the Muslim. What we've seen in the last few years is the reversal of burden of proof, that the normal Roman law that we follow, where the burden of proving a criminality rests on the state, has been reversed. So in Gujarat, for example, cow slaughter attracts 10 years in jail, and the burden of proof is on the person who is accused. So the person who's accused of cow slaughter needs to prove to the satisfaction of the magistrate that she has not actually killed the cow. We've actually had a case last year where a person has been convicted and sentenced to 10 years and asked to show that the meat consumed at the wedding of their daughter was not actually beef, months after the wedding was actually over. The High Court was embarrassed and overturned it, but the law is on the books. Similarly, I think there's a reversal of burden of proof on the National Register of Citizens, where you need to prove to the satisfaction of the state and its contractors the fact that you are a citizen of India. There's a reversal of burden of proof on UAPA, as we know. There's a reversal of burden of proof in those on those matters, including on love jihad. The UP law requires the male who marries a Hindu woman to show that even if she agrees, if an adult woman agrees to the fact that she has converted out of her free will, the person she's marrying needs to prove to the satisfaction of the state that this has happened without coercion. So I think this reversal of burden of proof will continue. The persecution of Muslims will actually continue. I don't think that the judiciary will be able to stop this. I think the judiciary is quite complicit in, for the most part, it is compliant where it doesn't need to be complicit. And I think it is cowardly in those parts where it is neither compliant nor complicit. So I think the one thing that we need to remember is that as a community, Desis need to fight back to make sure that constitutional rights, as they are guaranteed, are given to citizens. I would say that the strongest weapons that we have today are with the vote and with the court. I would say that they are protest, and I would say that they are advocacy. I would totally agree with Ajit when he says that one thing that has changed in the last few months, certainly, is the fact that the interest in India of the rest of the world and what is happening here, the alarm that people feel has redounded in our favor. I think that when you have people like Pamela Jayapal, who's working on Kashmir, when you have the EU MEPs who want to move a motion on CAA, we need to, as citizens of this country, as well-wishers of our nation, reach out and make sure that they have all the support that they need. And I think that it is quite possible that the state in India, even though it is controlled by a particular ideology, is still vulnerable. When Jaishankar and his diplomats go out to the world, they don't claim that they are representatives of a Hindu state. They still say that we are a secular nation. Look at our constitution. We are a pluralist. Their behavior might be different. Their claim is very, very separate from that. We have that space available to us to put pressure on them to make sure that the rest of the world tells them, behave in the way that your constitution requires you to. And I think that given that space, given the limited freedoms we have within India in terms of civil liberties, I'm quite hopeful that in the next 2 or 3 years, we will go back to what was not a very perfect, path. But I think that the reversal of what is going on now to a much better, brighter future, I don't think is very far off.
Okay. Thanks a lot.
I also
Aakar.
think we need to stress federalism a little bit. We tend to forget all this. We talk about just the central governments and the BJP governments, but our constitution is based on the federal principle. And I think if you look at, for instance, states like Tamil Nadu, Kerala, Bengal, and Telangana is very problematic on other fronts, particularly police encounters and all of that. But I still feel the whole federal issue is something we need to emphasize, even Rajasthan and Punjab and all the Congress governments, because I think at some point the opposition parties have begun to realize that, when you're in power at the center, you want to become unity, you want to be this thing, but nobody has been as brutal as the Modi government, for instance, in terms of crushing the states. But whether it is GST, whether it is so many other issues, they're actually trying to take the juice out of Indian federalism. And I think one point that we need to keep looking at is also the federal structure, because that's where the farm laws have been bitterly opposed and are also problematic. So these are chinks that we need to expand further. Even if there were limitations earlier, we need to push those chinks further, because there are cultures, there are regional issues. The South, for instance, has always, we don't look at the South enough. We only look at the North, and South has been culturally very, very different in terms of even its view of nationalism. So we need to look at all these things.
Yeah, I agree with you, Teesta, over there.
But I also want to emphasize, because many of us work very closely with the Muslim community across the country. And I still believe that we cannot emphasize enough how much the fear psychosis that is being generated against the Muslim community by the RSS Shakha. You know, we are hearing from UP villages and Bihar villages that they are being told that we are going to drive these Muslims out with CA and NRC and we'll grab their lands, you know. And they're mobilizing Dalits in their favor to say that land we'll give to you, you know. So, I mean, we can't underestimate the danger or the threat. I think that's the luxury of the non-Muslim today. I'm sorry to put it like that.
Yeah.
We cannot afford that luxury or to underestimate what a large section of our people are not just feeling, but they're undergoing. And I think, you know, I agree with Imran Sahab when he mentions the Owaisi factor, but I don't, you know, I look at it a bit differently, that if you find not strong enough statements coming from the political opposition to sort of empower you, then a section of Muslims is going to prefer a statement made by an Owaisi. And I would really like to urge, therefore, that whether it is the centrist Congress or whatever, or the left parties, that you need to be unequivocal on some issues. You know, you cannot be ashamed of taking a secular position. You cannot be defensive about taking a secular position. I don't think Muslims in this country have ever wanted a kind of pro-Muslim position, but they want a fair position, right? And I think that fair position needs to be politically stated fair and square from the opposition.
Yeah. Thanks a lot, Teesta. I actually was also going to say this, that the beauty of the Indian Constitution and Indian polity has been in the constitutionalism, and the way the current party is power grabbing and you know, breaking the constitutionalism is rather worrisome, because it is such a diverse country with a federal structure, and obviously there's so much of linguistic and religious identities and cultural identities in between. I think this is two of these questions which perhaps Imranji and Ajit can take at a time, and especially Ajit, because I know that he's also associated with Hindus for Human Rights. So the first question is that how do you see people psychologically, when Imranji also said in his talk that they are just referring to them as Hindus? How do you see people can be so disconnect with their neighbors who are not Hindus and, you know, stand in protest against them or just go out killing them? And then I want to ask Ajit as well, that what is actually this Hindu identity and how should we preserve it and go forward with it in the coming years? That what should be the role of the Hindus in this?
Either you want to take it first?
Imranji, perhaps?
Go first.
I read the question, and then one of the things that is always asked is that how can intelligent people fall for this? Yeah, this is not something that this is not a question of intelligence, unfortunately. And first of all, I have a lot of problems with that word intelligent and educated as well, because I think one of the things we are lacking actually is education. We are skilled, but we're not educated. If you're educated, you won't do certain things. But anyway, that's a different discussion. But the question is that most of the people, the target you're getting, the target by leadership is about what should be yours and what you haven't got. And so it's, I'm going to give you back your pride. We've seen this happen. We've seen this happen over the last 100 years. It happened in Europe. It's happened in different parts of Europe, even the last 20 years, where you go in and you say that there are problems. There is no country today that doesn't have problems. Good leadership tries to find solutions. Mediocre and bad leadership says, you have a problem, it's his fault, it's her fault, it's their fault. And when you tell people that over and over again, they are going to believe that. All of us, we remember Mandal Commission report when it came out. Look at the backlash in Delhi amongst the upper caste Hindus over there at that time, and also misguided Muslims at that point of time. People who are middle class and above Muslims who joined this and said, we are not succeeding because these people are getting reservation. This is what's happening. So you have this all along. It's got nothing to do with intelligence. Got nothing to do with anything like that. It's all what you target. And how you target the people by promising them what they are lacking. what Teesta just said. I mean, Bihar elections, this is what happened. You go into Dalit villages, they were all told, don't worry, you vote for us, we're getting rid of these guys, you're going to get their land. This is what is being told to they go to the tribal areas. Tribal areas are being told the same things. Don't worry. Once we get rid of these guys, who's going to take their land? We're giving it to you. Kashmir. Why do you think we've taken Kashmir? Because we're sending all of you there. You're going to get that land. And that's paradise. You're going to get lots of things. We have Indian politicians who said, not only will you get land, you get pretty women also. I mean, and this is the problem. You're giving people the promise of something which you cannot actually deliver on. But that's what you're doing. The problem is that these people actually believe that they're going to get something out of it. The 15 lakhs that was going to come into our account, nobody even questions that anymore. 15 lakh aane wala tha. All of us are going to get 15 lakhs in our account. We haven't seen that. There were going to be bullet trains everywhere. Banaras was going to be a fabulous city that was going to be at par with anything in the world. But people forget because they were promised that, they voted. Now they'll wait for the next promise. And that's what's going to happen. As far as Hindu pride, I think Ajit is going to answer that better than me. But I want to just tell you, as an Indian, I don't think it's just a question of a Hindu answering what is Hindu pride or what is Hindu culture. When Diwali or Holi takes place, you celebrate it as a religious festival. I celebrate it as my cultural festival. I'm part of it. I'm not part of 1400 years of India. I'm part of 5,000 years of India too. I'm part of that Hindu culture. I'm part of Hindu India as well, but in my terms, not Vande Mataram and not Jai Shri Ram. My terms, and that is what, and as a Muslim, I've been asked many times, asked this, and I'm sure I've had this discussion with Ajit as well. I've been asked, are you a Muslim first or an Indian first? And my answer to that, sorry for anybody who doesn't speak Urdu, but I'm going to say it in Urdu and then translate it. And I say this very clearly, कि Islam मेरी जान है, Hindustan मेरी सांस है. Tell me which is more important. They are two separate things. India is my every breath, and Islam is my heart, my soul. But I'm perpetually asked that to prove it. And I keep saying, don't question me on Islam. Question me if you have to on India and India's culture, which is me. When we have a wedding, we go through everything that is part of Indian culture. When we have a death, we go through everything that is part. The little religious ceremony takes place. Everything else is cultural. All of us. From Bihar, everything we do is cultural. Everything. And we are part of that. But now we are being pushed for the 92. It started with the Babri Masjid demolition, and we are being pushed into being a completely different identity, being a completely different people. And we are not. We're part of India. And we're not going to keep on proving it more than when I die, I will even be buried there. I become part of the soil there. That is my commitment to the country. Anyway.
Thank you.
I'm sorry. I didn't want to go before this Imran bhai finished, but I unfortunately have to go to another meeting. I have to leave now. Thank you so much.
Thanks a lot, Teesta. Thanks for being with us.
Sorry, Rasheed bhai. Sorry, Ajit. Yeah.
Oh, that's okay. Thank you, Teesta, for your time.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Bye.
I just want to add about, since you asked the question, Ritu, about the Hindu community. So it's very interesting, and you mentioned Hindus for Human Rights. Hindus for Human Rights is a non-profit, registered non-profit that has, I think they started some years ago here in the United States. Their opposition to Hindutva, the ideology of Hindutva, is unequivocal. And I can't speak for them, but from my interaction with them, what I have understood is very clearly that they have absolutely no, they have total clarity that Hindutva is a negation of Hinduism, that Hindutva is a fascist, ethno-nationalist ideology that is in total conflict to the religion of Hinduism, that as they understand. And I think there are a large number of people. Let us not forget that India has 80% Hindus, but Modi got 38% vote, and together with his allies, they got only 48% of the vote. If India was 80% Hindu, then that means that about half of Hindus are not voting for the BJP and its allies. That's something very important to remember. Even, if people are saying that Bihar, and Imran's point is very well taken about Bihar people voting, the Hindus voting for the BJP, but the fact is that the RJD, Lalu Yadav's party, which has been relentlessly targeted by the BJP for 30 years as an anti-Hindu party, it has still managed to get more seats than the BJP in the state of Bihar. So I think there is a limitation to how far you can take the ideology of Hindutva, even with the Hindus. Let's not forget that in 1947, when India became independent, we had about 400 million people, 40 crore people. 90% of India was literally uneducated and literally rural. And still, such was the sway of the ideology of secularism, and in the common folksy way that Mahatma Gandhi and Jawaharlal Nehru spread that ideology of secularism. You did not have to go to college to do PhD in secularism. It was the poor people in the villages, the poor Hindus in the villages of India, who were just coming out one of the bloodiest conflicts, armed conflict that the subcontinent had seen in centuries, where Hindus and Muslims had killed each other, and still the largely poor, uneducated, illiterate, rural folks of India accepted secularism as an ideology, where the Muslims were barely 10 to 12% and the Hindus were 80% plus, and still they accepted that ideology. In the United States, I can tell you, there are a large number of Hindus here in America who reject the ideology of Hindutva. I know so many of them. The thing was that they did not have a platform. I think Hindus for Human Rights has provided them a strong platform here in the United States. A lot of them are gravitating towards Hindus for Human Rights. A lot of Hindus in America, they are part of so many other organizations that they don't need to identify. I know, for example, at least two people who work with Kashmiri diaspora groups, and they identify as Hindus, So I think this whole ideology of Hindutva, in any case, there is a sell by date, ethno-nationalism in the 21st century is such a limiting, it has no purchase. That's why there are no arguments to be made, about the state of Israel. You will not find even the most conservative spaces, but mainstream conservative spaces in America, in Europe, you will not find them speaking out a word in support of Zionist Israel, because you just can't make that argument anymore. You could have made that argument 20 years ago, but in 2020, it's impossible to make that kind of argument. You can silently support the state of Israel because of your cynical, geostrategic, whatever, concerns.
Yeah.
But you can't make a popular argument in favor of it. Similarly, nobody can make a popular argument in favor of Hindutva. So I think there is a sell by date for Hindutva. The last point that I want to make, I think this whole Hindutva thing, Modi, these guys have been at it since 1925 when the RSS was founded. As we know, Savarkar wrote his treatise on Hindutva in 1923, and 2 years later, Hedgewar founded the RSS. Their history is very clearly in support of Hitler, in support of Mussolini, in support of fascism, in support of Nazism. Their history is very clearly in support of a dictator, Mr. Munje, B.S. Munje, when he traveled to Italy and met with Mussolini, and he came back and he wrote in his diary that he had a discussion with Hedgewar in which he said that India needs a dictator, but until such time we get a dictator, we have to work to build the organization. And I'm quite sure Mr. Modi fancies himself as that dictator who featured in that conversation between Munje and Hedgewar. But here is the thing. It has taken only 6 years for the proponents of Hindutva to come crashing down when it comes to governance, because governance is a completely different thing. I think I see the current situation of Hindus, especially because I come from a Hindu family, both on my father and mother's side. And I think 99% of my relatives are sold on Hindutva. I see this mostly as a B-grade Manoj Knight Shyamalan movie, where something happens in a village, there's a breeze that flows in a village and everybody goes crazy. I think that's what's happening with a large number of Hindus. I think it's only a matter of time where eventually it will hit the whole failure of governance will hit them so close, because the only single direction that the ideology of Hindu nationalism or of any kind of ethno-nationalism takes you to is destruction, is failure and destruction of all kinds of social, political, and civil activity. And I think that is exactly where Hindutva will be headed in the next 5 to 10 years.
Ritu, I think
Thanks
that's a very good conclusion for this. We are also running
Yes,
out
I
of time.
agree. And unfortunately, we do have a couple of more questions, but in the interest of time, we would have to stop it here.
We
And
will
so I'll
continue
pass it
this
on to
conversation.
Rasheed.
Yeah, thank you.
Rasheed
Yeah.
Ahmed.
Thank you, Ritu, and thank you, Imran and Ajit. Thank you, everybody, for joining us and participating in this conversation. We will continue this. This is only the beginning on what IAMC and London Story would do on CAA, NPR, NRC, on this particular subject. So you will hear from us soon for another conversation like this. Thank you, everybody, for joining us.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.